this beat is crazy.
Guys, the 94 feet is alive. I just got a text message.
Be recording, right?
Corbin's.
What's up, y'all?
Okay. Eustachio is 94 feet and Fear the Sword. David Brandon is Daily Thunder.
There are 4 people watching you right now, Alex. It's pretty exciting.
Andrew, I'm on TV.
Man, this beat is crazy. Man, this beat is crazy. this beat is crazy. This beat is crazy. this beat is crazy. This beat is crazy.
You're watching The Swingmen, presented by the 94 Feet Report.
All right. Welcome to the first ever Swingmen live free agency extravaganza. At least I think that's what we're calling it, guys. I'm your host, Simon Sharon Gordon, and I'm joined by a wonderful team tonight. Going to introduce everyone that's going to be here with me all night first. We have Alex West with us.
Just waving.
We have Eric Spiropoulos.
Guys, we have our first rumored signing, Will Barton, for 4 years, somewhere around $50 million. It's already starting really early.
Yeah, Eric's going to bring us good stuff like that all night. We have Josh Cornelison.
Hey guys, I was sneaking into the decision cave to keep an eye on LeBron, but then I heard they were cupcakes in OKC, so I'm heading that way after the show.
Yeah, and Josh is going to bring us stuff like that all night. And we also have Corbin Ford.
just super hyped as a Lakers fan, man. Feeling the love, feeling the energy, ready for this.
Yeah, gonna be an exciting night. We'll see what comes down in terms of big signings. Tell you a little bit about what to expect, though, if you're going to be with us for the next couple hours. If you watched our draft show, you probably have a good idea. We're going to bring in guests throughout the show from around the NBA universe to discuss 2018 free agency, as well as any deals that may come down as soon as 1 hour from now, because free agency kicks off at midnight Eastern. And so where I want to start, guys, we'll get into some of the bigger free agent storylines over the next hour as we kind of preview this summer. But what do you guys expect for tonight at midnight? Do you think there's going to be a lot of activity, a little? Let me start with you, Alex. What do you expect from this opening free agent night?
I'm not expecting a lot, Simon. I think that, Woj talked about it yesterday. This might be a little bit of a slower market. There's obviously some depression. The 2016 hangover is still kicking in. I don't think we're going to get a lot tonight. I think we may get 1 or 2 signings, but I think the real interest is obviously LeBron, Paul George, what's going to happen with Kawhi. But I have a lot of interest in the restricted free agency market with Jabari Parker, with Marcus Smart, with Aaron Gordon. I think there are some really, really good players who can add to the Pacers, the Jazz. There are teams who are pretty close to being competitive, and I think that following those guys, and maybe for a week, maybe for a couple of weeks, but I think those are going to be where the interesting stories are.
I couldn't agree with you more, Alex. I think we should start there. I think that is the most interesting part of the summer, is the restricted free agent market. And I mean, Josh and Corbin, who participated in the 94 Feet Report mock off season with me, we can maybe speak to some predictions for what the market might look like for these guys. But I want to start with 3 names. So Jabari Parker, Dante Exum, and Zach LaVine, all 3 of whom drafted in 2014, have shown a lot of promise and also have had their fair share of health concerns over the first 4 years of their careers. What do you guys think their market is looking like right now? In some ways, it does seem like these guys might be able to get a little more based on the desperation of their teams not to lose them, teams giving them poison pill offer sheets. On the other hand, how scared are people going to be about their injury problems?
Yeah, so I think that when you're looking at the restricted market, you have to really believe in a guy to give him an offer sheet, because if not, you expect the team that player is currently on to match. So you can go out on a limb for a guy that you know is going to be a stud, like Clint Capella or Nikola Jokic. I doubt those guys will even sign offer sheets. They'll probably return for large contracts. But those guys, you kind of have a certainty there. But when you're going out on a limb for a guy like Dante Exum, who just has not been healthy, you're really just playing for upside. And most likely, you're going to sign him to a contract that he has to meet that upside just to match that contract. And that's where you end up with overpays. So that's where I would be concerned, because Jabari Parker has had 2 major knee injuries, and we just don't know if athletically he'll be right where he was before. Exum continually is getting hurt. And Zach LaVine, his game is predicated on his elite athleticism, his ability to just rise up on that jumper lightning fast. And if that doesn't come all the way back, I don't know what he is that contributes to a team. So unless you're someone like Sacramento that just doesn't care about making wise basketball decisions, I think it's very risky to sign either of those 3 players to an offer sheet.
I definitely second that, especially with Milwaukee when it comes to Jabari Parker. He scores at all 3 levels, talented in that way. The injury concerns, though, are very real. And if you can match that same offensive output with cheaper options, why not do that? Are you really willing to invest $20 million per year to a player coming off of such, shaky just injury issues and fit wise, because his fit with the core pieces is not solid? Would you really want to invest that much when you can get cheaper options that deliver the same type of output on the open market? And that's really the question with Jabari in particular, but also with LaVine. How much do you want to pay him to be a core piece for this new build? Are you really going to max him out? No, obviously not, with injury concerns and just his full recovery, not having the strongest season since he's returned. There's a lot more question marks and more questions, honestly, than answers with the restricted free agency here, and that's what makes it so interesting.
I think that you have to look at a team like the Brooklyn Nets. I'm a big fan of the Nets and how they've gone about not having any assets and still managing to make moves. But, that 4-year after that first restricted free agency, that's when you get that second draft thing where you're trying hard to find guys. Teams like the Suns trading for Elfrid Payton's a perfect example of this. You get that second draft, and I think if you're a team like Brooklyn, like you got to take a chance. And a guy like Jabari he may flame out, but at this point, you're not competing in the next 3 or 4 years. And if you can acquire Jabari and he stays healthy, I mean, that kind of risk can pretty much mitigate whatever downside would be. And the downside is that you're paying an injured Jabari Parker. But like I said, if you're not competitive, then what's the worry? So I think that you have these teams that can play spoiler in these markets, and they can offer poison pill contracts and backload them and stuff like that. And I think the Brooklyn Nets are one. I'm not sure how many teams can do that, but I think that there are teams out there with a little bit of cap space who can really make some noise if they so choose.
Yeah, Alex is our resident Boston Celtics fan, so it makes sense that he's a fan of the Brooklyn Nets not having any assets. But let's stick with Boston for a minute and go on to, I think, might be the most interesting restricted free agent on this market, which is Marcus Smart. Smart, I mean, he might take the qualifying offer. He could get as much as, I don't know, $15 million a year. He seems to have the biggest range to me. Alex, what do you think Boston's approach is going to be with Smart? And then we can get into what Smart's mentality might be.
It's got to be conservative. They're going to be, not this season, but next season, they're going to be really up against the luxury tax, the repeater tax, all that kind of stuff. Smart is an integral piece to the Boston Celtics puzzle, but if you're going to pay Kyrie Irving, then you have to start consider that. What are you going to do with Terry Rozier? There are only so many minutes for ball handlers in that Boston offense. And so you kind of got to start making these decisions, and you got to make them sooner rather than later. Now, what does that mean for Marcus Smart? I don't know. It would be my preference to keep him, but it would be also my preference to keep him on a Lou Williams deal in that $8 to $12 million range. But I've heard numbers as high as 14, Simon, and that number's pretty high for a team that is going to be pushing up against the luxury tax next year.
Yeah, let's turn now to a couple of the restricted centers on this market. And where I want to start, go to you for this one, Eric, is Clint Capella. Do you think there's anything to Capella's free agency other than either someone's going to give him a max sheet, Houston matches, or Houston's just going to give that to him?
Yeah, I think that's what's going to happen. Pretty much with LeBron opting out, that kind of eliminated the Rockets from the LeBron sweepstakes. Paul George looks likely to return to OKC. There just aren't any other big fish for the Rockets to chase after, and all the reports and indications today have been pretty much saying that the Rockets are just now focused on retaining their guys. Bringing back Chris Paul, whether they give him a 4 or 5 year max, giving a nice offer to Capella. The interesting thing is that with the Dallas Mavericks most likely going after DeAndre Jordan, which we can talk about later because I have some whole other thoughts on that situation, that takes a key player outside of the Capella sweepstakes, which means that they have some leverage over Capella. They probably don't want to, piss him off by giving him a pretty low offer, but they might not have to give him a full max if no other team is going to give him that in restricted free agency. But all indications, I think, are Capella's going to come back, and the Rockets might give him an offer right away, not worry about a team, giving a offer sheet. They're going to bring back Chris Paul. They're going to try and bring back Trevor Ariza. They're going to try and bring back the role players like Gerald Green, Luke Mbamute. This team's going to be really expensive, so it'll be very interesting to see how they fill out the depth of this roster after they give those big offers to Paul, Capella, and potentially Ariza. But all indications are that Clint Capella's restricted free agency would be pretty boring if it happens at all.
On the flip side of that, I think that Clint Capella, the Dallas Mavericks and the DeAndre Jordan, Clint Capella situation is interesting because that's going to kind of set the tone for the market. Once the Mavericks make a decision for a center, I'm looking at you got Cousins, who's obviously coming off injury, then you've got Capella, who's a restricted free agent, and then DeAndre Jordan, who's unrestricted. But then you have guys like Enes Kanter, you have Yusuf Nurkic, Brook Lopez, Greg Monroe, Kyle O'Quinn. There are names that are going to find the market quite chilly after the Mavericks make their decision. And I got to agree with Eric on this one. I think Capella is coming back to play with the Rockets because I think that when you win 65 games and you take the defending champs to 7 games, you just run it back and you see how well you can do. But I think the market's going to get pretty cold after Dallas makes their decision.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is that there are all these reports of a lot of these players, especially a guy like Yusuf Nurkic, turned down what was a nice-sized offer in the fall, and I guess he didn't get the knowledge that the market would be pretty cold. If the Mavericks with DeAndre Jordan, this is an interesting situation because I want to see what deal they give him because they have all the leverage in these negotiations. If I'm the Mavericks, I'm offering him that Paul Millsap deal, which is 2 years plus a team option on the third. DeAndre Jordan's going to be on the wrong side of 30 for this contract. He saw a decline last year. Maybe that was because of his mental engagement not being there. Or maybe it's just an athletic decline. Either way, if I'm the Mavericks, I have all the leverage. I'm offering that 2+1 team option deal. Clint Capella going to return to the Rockets most likely. DeMarcus Cousins is an interesting one. There's reports about the Lakers going after him in a short-term max. The Pelicans obviously want to bring him back. But then those other guys, Enes Kanter opted in, $18 million. He knew he was not going to get that in today's market. Yusuf Nurkic is going to be an interesting one. We could probably see him accept the qualifying offer and just try and become an unrestricted free agent. If the Blazers had to let go, they didn't offer Shabazz Napier or can't remember the other role player, Pat Connaughton. Yeah, they didn't do qualifying offers for them, so they had to lose them because of that 2016 hell spending that they did. But Nurkic, I could definitely see him taking a qualifying offer and just try and build up his value for 2019. There will be a little bit more money, but that's always a risk as well. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see anything restricted free agency wise, but also just the center position in general will be fascinating to watch in this free agency.
Yeah, and really how those two things overlap. I mean, it's a little bit baffling. It makes sense when you break it down that way, Eric, but it's a little bit baffling that a guy like Yusuf Nurkic, who for all intents and purposes had a comparable season to Clint Capella, I would say. He was a defensive player of the year, fringe candidate, I guess, huge part of Portland's success this year. But then, as you alluded to in the Western Conference Finals, Capella's impact against the Warriors, I mean, that seems to be the big difference there. But that one of those guys is going to get maxed out and one of those guys might take the qualifying offer kind of shows this razor-thin margin in terms of the viability of centers in today's game.
Yeah, and it also depends on the team, of course. The Rockets, if the Rockets had Nurkic, they couldn't really do their switching scheme because Nurkic can't really switch well. Capella allows them to do that, which is their best way of playing defense, given their roster and the abilities of their wing defenders. And that switching ability by Capella instantly boosts his value, especially with the Rockets. But again, Capella's a player who he's more valuable to the Rockets than he would be to the majority of other teams. I think that if there was a team that threw a max offer at Clint Capella and they didn't have elite playmaking from their guards and they weren't really distributing using a switch everything scheme, even though Capella can obviously play a traditional defensive scheme in terms of just rim protection, staying back, he excels as switching, which is obviously a modern NBA scheme that a lot of coaches still haven't really adapted. I think that Capella obviously thrives on elite playmakers, thrives on switching, thrives on defending the rim. But if you don't have all those pieces around him, he's not as valuable as a max contract guy for other teams, which obviously changes his value from the Rockets' perspective versus the other 29 teams in the league.
Yeah, and we can certainly get deeper into the center market, into the restricted market as we go on here. But we're 15 minutes into a free agency show, and we haven't really talked LeBron James. So we have Eustachio Rowley here of the 94 Feet Report, of Fear the Sword, writes about the Cleveland Cavaliers. Eustachio, let's start this LeBron discussion right now. First of all, do you think that the fate is sealed for the Cavs here?
Well, the Vegas odds earlier today were 98% that he's going to Los Angeles. So, I mean, the Cavs have hit on 2% odds in the lottery before, but I don't think they're going to hit on these odds here. I think it's pretty much a done deal that he's going to LA.
All right. Well, we might get some more optimism coming in later when we have TJ Burns on. But let's approach this as if he's gone. Okay. So, what is your rebuild scenario for Cleveland, or should they rebuild?
I think they should definitely rebuild. They have their 2019 first-round draft pick going to Atlanta, unless it's in the first 10 selections. So they need to make sure that they're towards the top of the lottery, so they keep that pick and get a few young, talented players to start building around. They have Colin Sexton right now. They have Jetty Osman as a wing, and they also have Larry Nance Jr. as a big man. But there's not much else on the roster that's young. It's a roster filled with veterans built around LeBron James. So entering into a rebuild, naturally some of those players are going to be offloaded to teams that they have value to at this point.
Eustachio, do you think that Kevin Love has a tremendous amount of value? I mean, here's a player who's showcased himself as the ability. He's got a great score. He's got good range. He's a rebounder. The market is depressed a little bit for him with playing with LeBron. I mean, playing with LeBron has proven to be a little bit of a difficult thing for some players. But what do you think the market is for a guy like Kevin Love? if they do decide to go into a rebuild?
I'm not sure what the market is, but I think the market should be strong because he's still a really good player. He was very close to hitting 50% from 2-point, 40% from 3-point, and 90% from the free throw line this year. And he's just a very versatile offensive player. You can plug him into any offense and he can find a role. He showed that in his time in Cleveland, adapting to that third banana role. And then this year he was the second guy on the roster. But he's also showed earlier in his career in Minnesota that he can be the guy on offense. So I think that there are several teams that should be interested in him. What they'll end up getting in return, probably a couple late second, first round picks, maybe a young player or two, but we'll see. The perception of him doesn't seem very favorable around the league, but I think he's a player that should still have value.
I totally agree with you. It's kind of baffling to me how much that we have just run down the Kevin Love train. I mean, he obviously is a player that just is not super accommodating to what LeBron wants. LeBron wants to play with a bunch of wings, and he wants to play with a bunch of shooters, and he wants to play with defenders, and I guess Love doesn't really fall into all those categories, but Love's a great player, and he's still pretty young, and so I just think it's always an interesting question for him. Now, I have another question for you. How do you feel about Colin Sexton as a quote-unquote centerpiece for this Cavs rebuild, if it comes to that?
Well, I wasn't too high on him in our draft work this year. I think that he has a high risk of topping out as just an average point guard. That said, he is very athletic. He has a great first step. He gets into the lane well. He's a good pick and roll scorer, and he's good at drawing contact around the rim. So the Cavs need to focus then on creating the environment that will allow him to do those things at a high level, making sure he has the spacing to get to the rim consistently, making sure that he has a good screen setter to spring him loose in those pick and roll situations, and to develop that game and try to help him to learn the reads out of the pick and roll, hit his outlets with better consistency. At Alabama, his outlets were terrible. They couldn't make any shots. They shot 30% on three-pointers out of his pick and roll passes. And so it's no wonder that he tried to do it all himself. So if they can develop his pick and roll game and he develops his jump shooting to a degree, there is some high-end upside there. It's not a risk that I would have wanted to take in their position, but it's not hopeless either trying to build around him. So creating that proper environment for him will be key moving forward.
Anastasia, so I have a long-term, more LeBron-centric question here. If or when he leaves, what is your lasting memory of this more recent 4-year run that he's had, or this most recent tenure here? Is it sadness, a little bit of resignation, because you kind of knew it was coming after the finals performance or the finals, run the Cavs had? Are we happy, hey, he got the ring in 2016, so we're redeemed in that way? What are your feelings about that? And what do you think the consensus is for those LeBron fans, or those Cleveland fans, should I say, reacting to him possibly going?
I'm not sure if there's a consensus at this point, but for me personally, I'm appreciative of the fact that he brought the city its first title in over 50 years. And I mean, it was a good run. The Cavaliers, I think their teams the last 4 years perhaps were a little bit underappreciated just because of how good the Warriors were. And they didn't measure up, especially after Durant. There was just no comparison. But if you look at what they did against the Eastern Conference, the first 3 years, it was 36-5 against the Eastern Conference in the playoffs. That's sheer domination. Nobody stood a chance. And then this year, it wasn't as good, of course, but I mean, the peaks that team reached, the 2017 team had the highest offensive rating in the playoffs of any team in NBA history, at least in the modern era. So it was a good run. I accept that he needs to move on now, but I enjoyed it thoroughly, and I'm happy with how it worked out for the most part.
Oh, and I got one more question to piggyback on that. With LeBron, as I said, going, do you think the Cavs are pressured or have any plans to make any moves to get rid of more veteran pieces like a Kyle Korver, like a J.R. Smith, or do you think they'll be needed more as veteran leadership for a Colin Sexton, the younger players that are still on the Cavs roster? What is the kind of mindset there that you think they would go about?
That's a good question. The three that I think have trade value right now are George Hill, Kyle Korver, and Kevin Love. And I think each of those three offer some value to the Cavaliers in developing Colin Sexton. Kevin Love is a stretch four that will keep the lane open for him and a release valve that will make it so he doesn't have to do everything himself. Korver, his spacing is always beneficial, of course, and he's good at helping the younger guys develop their shooting technique. Like you can see the clips of Jetty Osman in the international games right now, that his shot form looks a lot different from last year, and Korver could be part of the source of that. And George Hill, just as having that veteran point guard presence, could be useful. But at the same time, that's a lot of salary between those three players. It's about $50 million devoted to those three. So I would expect them to offload at least one of them, but I would like them to keep at least one of the veteran guys around to help the younger guys grow and develop over the next couple of years.
All right, Eustaquio, thanks for coming on. We appreciated your insights at draft time and continuing with some great stuff here. We'll catch up soon. All right.
All right, sounds great. Thanks, guys.
All right, so if you're watching this via YouTube, please send us some questions. We'd love to get to some of you guys on the show or on Twitter. Guys, have we had any questions come in so far?
Yeah, we've actually got one here from Kasim Baker asking who the Phoenix Suns will go after in free agency. Corbin, you got your ear to the ground around there. You got any thoughts?
I would say a point guard, especially with us now bringing back Alfred Payton. I've heard Fred VanVleet is a name that's been thrown around a little bit. I think that would be a nice signing if Phoenix could throw a good offer at him. And a stretch four. I'm not really sure what kind they're looking to get, but I know that's something that I've been kind of monitoring on our radio and stuff that we've been talking about. A point guard, stretch four. In the market there for a four, I think there's plenty that you can go just shooters to kind of open up the lane, but you already said center, shooting guard. We have a plethora of wing players. Definitely get that point guard. And I think that VanVleet will be a great fit there.
I think another name to throw in that list is Derek Favors. You mentioned a stretch four. Favors a little bit more of a traditional four, but I think that that's a name, as well as Jabari Parker, that could test the waters. Phoenix has a nice young core. They've not proven anything, but DeAndre Ayton and Devin Booker is a nice starting point for anything. And if they could lure one of those guys from restricted free agency, even if it's a guy like Marcus Smart who can handle the ball and seems to be able to create opportunities for teammates, I think that would be an interesting team to just sort of follow. And they've got a little bit of money, so maybe they can bring somebody on. I don't love that they unloaded Ulis, but I guess somebody's making the call there, and it's not me.
I'm all aboard Fred VanVleet to the Suns. I think it's just in general, watching Fred VanVleet's market will be interesting. Restricted free agent. The Raptors don't have really much money. If someone gives him a decent offer, they're probably going to have to let him go. Obviously, there are concerns, though. He has never, he's not a starting point guard when he was with the Raptors. Can you pay him starter money and start him alongside a guy like Devin Booker? There will be some concerns and some question marks in that backcourt, but I do think the fit is nice, and I do think that getting him, I believe he's 24, getting him on a nice deal that's not too unreasonable for the next 3 or 4 years would be a nice move for the Suns. I think also getting some just veteran guys that can fit those roles that Corbin mentioned, a guy like Anthony Tolliver as that stretch four. I believe he hit over 40% of his threes, should come pretty cheap, nice veteran presence for the locker room that still has a lot of young guys in there. If you add Fred VanVleet, you add a smaller veteran like Anthony Tolliver, just adding a couple of pieces here and there that are not the guys, obviously, in terms of adding to your team. You have Devin Booker, DeAndre Ayton, Josh Jackson, etc. But adding those smaller pieces that fit in both now and for the future would be moves that I would be looking to make if I were the Phoenix Suns this year.
Yeah, great first question from Twitter or from YouTube, I guess that one was. Keep those coming throughout the show, please. Right now, though, I want to go to David Brandon, who's joining us right now. David is a Daily Thunder contributor. David, welcome to our free agency show.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, so look, obviously, we have to start by talking about Paul George here. One of the biggest names this summer for the entire league and certainly for Oklahoma City, kind of the be-all, end-all. Before we get into kind of the two paths that the Thunder can go depending on his decision, do you have any feeling on what direction he's going, or is this a total toss-up to you?
I mean, like, we've been burned before here in Oklahoma City, as everybody kind of knows. So I've been pretty reserved about the possibility of Paul George returning. But every source I've seen is saying, like, it's pretty close to a done deal right now. So unless he pulls, like, a Chris Bosh to Houston, if anybody remembers that from a couple years ago, where it was, like, 11th hour, and then it was like, nope, not going there after all. Other than that, I think it's pretty close to done from everything I've been seeing. I don't have anything behind the scenes to weigh in on that with, but everything I'm seeing publicly is that that's the case. So, yeah.
David,
go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, I was going to ask, do you think that the Thunder are going to be willing to wade deep into the luxury tax, or are they going to look to offload some salary if they do bring Paul George back for a max contract?
I mean, both are going to have to be true because they're going to be like 150, 160 mil as far as like actual salary, which is kind of in the absurd territory. That's not even counting tax. So like for them to say we're going to bring Paul George back, that's a commitment to we're going to pay stupid luxury tax. Now, they're probably more willing to do that. I mean, there's other stuff to go into the James Harden situation. I don't have to go over that again. They added another billionaire owner the year after the Harden situation. And as Zach Lowe pointed out, OKC ownership has a little deeper pockets than most people think. They've also been saving for this 2 or 3 year span since the franchise came to Oklahoma City. That's part of the reason why they wanted to keep the clock on the repeater tax back the year of the Harden trade, is because they were waiting for this time period. Now, they expected that they'd have Kevin Durant on board instead of, Paul George and Carmelo Anthony. They thought they might have Horford too. But, that's the way that things go sometimes. So, yeah, they are willing to go deep into the tax. Sorry, get this camera back.
So David, on that note, are the Thunder definitely a lock to keep Jeremy Grant or to retain him, or are they kind of floating on that one? What's the thinking there?
They're going to pay for him if they can. He's unrestricted. I don't think he's going to make more than the full mid-level exception, which is around $8.5 million, because that's kind of the money that's on the market right now. There's only a couple teams with significant cap space, and everybody else that would be going after him is either only going to have, like, their biggest would be the mid-level exception, or it would be the smaller taxpayer mid-level, which is in the $5 million-ish range. So I think he probably signs for 7, 8-ish, wherever he goes, maybe a little less. And the Thunder are going to try to retain him if they can, despite the tax bill, because that'll drop back some with Carmelo Anthony coming off the books. They'll have a little bit coming off next year that'll help a little. They're still in rough waters for tax for the next couple of years, but you're paying for good players, so.
David, another question just came in from YouTube. Do you see any possibility of a buyout for Carmelo Anthony? I mean, I know that's something that's been kicked around.
Yeah, I mean, I don't personally think they're going to have him on the team next year. I don't know how that happens. I don't think they're going to stretch him because they're in bad waters tax and salary-wise for the next couple of years unless they deal Westbrook or Adams, which I might see Adams moving in the next year or two. Like, they love him, but $25 million a year is a lot for center. And they may think they can replicate that production elsewhere. So what was the question again? Sorry.
Did you think about what is in the cards as a possibility this season?
Yeah, I think it's a possibility. It's hard to say without sourcing on that. But I do think that they could buy him out. Zach Lowe said that they might be worried about the optics of that. I think it was Lowe who said that. But I think it might be on the cards. I don't know if that relationship is repairable right now, because apparently from every source I've seen locally, he's pretty disgruntled with his role, which, I mean, he was not great last year. And I don't think he's going to be great moving forward. He was good with the bench. Like, the bench was a positive with him. When they played Carmelo with the bench and Raymond Felton earlier in the year, the bench was pretty good. So, I mean, I don't know what they do. I really don't. I mean, I could see them maybe moving him for slightly longer term salary, depending on how long they want to pay, how deep their pockets are. They could go like, I don't know, Miami for Tyler Johnson and, you know, James Johnson, and then Miami buys him out so they can get more cap space for next year to go big game hunting. Or maybe they go for another, like, you know, a Kent Bazemore, or Denver's been a trade partner for OKC a lot in the past. Maybe they go for that, and Denver clears space on the books for next year. I don't know. But I don't think he's going to be on the roster next year. I don't know how that happens, but I don't see it happening that he's on there next year.
David, one name I wanted to ask you about is Alex Abrinas. I've heard his name thrown around as potential salary dump kind of move to lessen the tax bill. Do you think that Oklahoma City would consider that? And if so, is that a sign that Terrence Ferguson might be ready to step into a bigger role? What's your feeling on that?
They love Ferguson in Oklahoma City. Like, they really, really love the guy. Like, everybody from Billy Donovan to the front office, apparently. Like, Donovan was playing him more than he should have in terms of the numbers. Like, they wanted to get him run. I think they think Ferguson can step into that role. So Abrinas could be one of those guys who's on the trade line, as well as Kyle Singler, who's not much but a salary dump. Dead salary at this point. He's unguaranteed next year. Also, Patrick Patterson, who was not as happy with his role. He came in expecting to be a starter. He was a reserve. He didn't play as much. He wasn't great in the time that he had. So Abrinas and Patterson and Singler, if there's going to be salary cut, those are the three guys I would watch, because they're all three expiring next year. Singler's unguaranteed. And those guys, you know, that's 15 millish of salary you could cut there. And I think they'll bring in their second round picks to kind of fill out the back end of the roster, and probably bring back Raymond Felton, and, you know, we'll see what happens there.
I was actually just about to ask about Felton. He had a pretty solid season of backup point guard, which isn't saying much. I assume you agree with me, given the backup point guards OKC's had since Reggie Jackson left.
Let's not even talk about that.
Samaj Christian, anyone?
Samaj Christian. Oh,
exactly. But given that, is he definitely a lock to come back as far as a backup point guard? Do you see OKC possibly exploring other options? I mean, are there other options?
I don't think he's a lock, but I don't know that there's anybody out there that you can get for his money that's better. I would look, if I were OKC, I would look at Shabazz Napier. I would look at Tyler Ulis. Both those guys hit the market. Both of those guys are solid. I particularly like Napier, who had a really solid year in Portland. But, I mean, I just don't know. I don't know what they're looking for. And Felton was solid last year. They love him in the locker room. I think the default is they bring him back.
All right, David, thanks so much for coming on, giving us some OKC perspective. I'm sure we'll talk about Paul George more as the night goes on. Maybe we'll even have some news on him. That's certainly probably the hope in Oklahoma City. Before you go, is there anything you want to plug, any work you're doing?
I don't have anything out at the moment, but dailythunder.com is the site I write for. There's a lot of great people over there whose writing you can read. Yeah, it's a great crew. And if you want to know anything about Oklahoma City and the Thunder, that's your go-to spot. Those people are good. So, yeah.
All right. Thanks, David, for coming on the show. That was David Brandon of the Daily Thunder. Guys, what do we got? Anything more? Any news yet? We're 26 minutes by my clock away from the official start of free agency, but it seems like things have pretty much started already.
If we want to talk about Will Barton, the report is that he will be signing a 4-year, around $50 million deal. Zach Lowe reported that the 4th year is a team option. A player option, excuse me. So that's an interesting wrinkle here there that he got. A lot of people on Twitter, from the reaction that I've seen so far, consider it an overpay. But the fact that he got a nice deal plus a player option, it's good negotiation. Apparently the market was higher for Barton than people expected. That was from Matt Moore of the Action Network. So listen, the Nuggets they're going to be a really expensive team this season. They're going to have to make a move to cut salary, and those rebuilding teams that have salary cap space, like the Atlanta Hawks, come in, where the Nuggets can attach their 2019 first-round pick for the Hawks to take on, Kenneth Faried and maybe Jarrell Arthur as well. we'll have to see what kind of assets they have to give up depending on how much money they get off. But they will be making a cost-cutting move because this team's salary books for this season are brutal. And while in the summer of 2019 they can get much better and they can carve out some space, they still need. This is a mid-market team that's not going to be paying this much luxury tax for a team that still hasn't made the playoffs with their current core, though a lot of people expect them to in the upcoming season.
I think that there was a strong market for Barton. You heard rumors that Indiana was going to pursue him. You heard rumors that Memphis was interested in him at the mid-level. And so what Denver can do is keep him in the fold. He was a part of their best lineups last year. And the contract, I think, was very specifically negotiated. Because if you look at the numbers, with Will Barton and with a max contract for Nikola Jokic, the Nuggets are going to be about $21.1 million over the tax line per early bird rights. And if you look at Darrell Arthur plus Kenneth Faried, that's $21.2 million, about $100,000 more. So if they attach a first-round pick or maybe a second asset, and move those contracts to Chicago, Atlanta, Sacramento, one of these teams with space that's going to be looking to take on bad money for assets, they can basically just get under the luxury tax line perfectly. So I think it was kind of specifically negotiated with Barton's camp to bring him on basically for the max they could offer him while still realistically getting under the tax either this offseason or by the trade deadline.
All right, guys. So much more to get to here. Teams with cap space, teams without cap space, mid-level exception guys. I'm going to throw it out to you. Where do you want to go next year?
We got a couple of questions from YouTube that I would like to get to. We have one from Steve-O Games. Steve-O said, what do you think the Nets are going to do in free agency? And then Lance Robertson said, who do you think the Clippers are looking at? So those are two nice discussion points there.
Yeah, let's start with Brooklyn.
So
go ahead, Josh.
Next, I was just going to point out the Nets, depending on if they renounce their free agents, which is a scintillating class, including Nick Stauskas and Jahlil Okafor, they can get all the way to about $8 million in space. If they do negotiate a buyout with Dwight Howard, that number could go up as well. So they don't have a ton of space to be big players. They use that instead to take on bad salary and gain assets, which I think has worked out well for them. Now they're going to have to look maybe more at bargain options that they can start to look at as pieces long term. So guys that maybe they can get for $3, $4, $5 million per year, but lock them up for a longer term contract, and then they can contribute down the road as the Nets kind of start to rise back towards relevance.
I think one name that you can throw in there is Mario Hezonja. Hezonja might be available in that sort of option. Obviously he hasn't had this season that they hoped, or he hasn't had the career that they've hoped in Orlando. But I think they have some really interesting options on the roster right now. I think Zanan Musa is going to be a good player. I think Rodion Kurix could be a good player as well. And then they still have some really, really interesting players. Karis LeVert came on as a ball handler last season and was particularly impressive. And I think there's still a little bit for Spencer Dinwiddie to give. And then, of course, you have D'Angelo Russell. So this is a roster that they're a little bit past the tanking phase and a little bit more into the evaluation stage. I don't know who's going to end up sticking it out from here, but I think that they have a lot of money. If they get down under that line and can play with some money, I think they can bring in some interesting options. And then after that, I believe that it's just going to be settle down and let Kenny Atkinson do his thing and figure out who you want on this roster long term.
I just want to announce before you go, Corbin. I'm the guy who's announcing all these signings tonight, so I want to make sure we get the deals. Chris Haynes at ESPN is reporting Will Barton is signing a 4-year, $54 million deal with a player option on the 4th year. So we finally do have that number. And it's not 50 million range; it's 54 million with a player option on the 4th year.
Got you. Okay, cool. So, I was going to say, carrying on with the Nets, just really briefly, the decision you were saying to look at the roster in future years to really analyze Rondae Hollis-Jefferson, his fit, because as the side of a shooting guard, really more of the finishing, rebounding type qualities of a big. He's more of a tweener, but he can switch pretty well defensively, and he's one of the type of fits that a team would like to have on their roster. The only problem is figuring out how much that's worth, especially on their second and third contract. So looking ahead, it's going to be interesting to see how Brooklyn looks at Hollis Jefferson, whether they can float him and get some assets back, and if not, how much do they value him, and how much do they think other teams will value him, in the next couple of years?
Yeah, certainly a lot of questions for Brooklyn. There's also the Dwight Howard situation, the cap space that they're clearing going into next summer. So Brooklyn hopefully become a free agent player here. Let's get to the Los Angeles Clippers, though, the latter half of that question. DeAndre Jordan opting out, which came as a surprise to me. We can get into, I know Eric had some thoughts on the DeAndre situation. We hit on them briefly earlier. We can get into that more if we want, but let's talk about the Clippers offseason now with DeAndre off the books. Still not a lot of money to spend there, but how is this shaping up for them?
I think that bringing in Marcin Gortat was a really interesting move. We talked about this earlier in the week. I guess not on any media outlet. We just kind of talked about it in private. They brought in two players in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Jerome Robinson, both of whom are pick and roll players. And I think when you have a screen threat, a guy who led the league in screen assists last year like Marcin Gortat did, I think that's the kind of player you want to pair with these young ball handlers to give them kind of a safety net. Obviously, that sort of spelled the end of DeAndre Jordan. But I kind of find LA in this similar boat as Brooklyn, where they're going to be in a talent evaluation stage. I believe that they can probably move off Tobias Harris. Maybe that happens during the summer. Maybe that happens during the season. But I believe that that's something he's probably a little bit ahead of their timeline and somebody who might be able to bring back some assets. I think they're probably in for a couple of years of being a little bit down, but you never know. Ballmer's going to be hungry. He might be ready to jump back into being competitive. So I guess we'll see.
This team, I have two things to add. One is that Nikola Jokic is going to accept that 5-year, $148 million max contract shortly after midnight. So he's going to officially sign it. So that's going to become official shortly. On the Clippers, I think it's oh, sorry, I'm getting interrupted because Paul George is committed to sign a deal with OKC from Woj, so that's also official. So we can talk about that after I say something about the Clippers really quickly. The Clippers, there's a concerning aspect here in which case seeing these teams, and the Sixers are that prime one where the Sixers were stuck in being an 8 seed, 9 seed, 10 seed, 7 seed, whatever for a couple of years, and you have to tear things down to really avoid that mediocrity, and no one really wants to be. Well, I shouldn't say no one, but most teams don't want to be in that mediocrity kind of area of the NBA, in which case you're either being first-round fodder for the elite teams in the playoffs or just being a late lottery pick, in which case you don't get the star players in the draft. There are some concerning aspects for the Clippers in terms of that could become that if they don't execute properly in terms of handling what young players they have now, effectively trading away the players that aren't on their timeline for younger assets, drafting right, etc. They brought in Jerry West. But again, as Alex mentioned, Steve Ballmer, does he really want to rebuild? Doc Rivers is the coach. Does he want to rebuild? All indications are no. Re-signing Lou Williams is an indication that they're going to compete this year. So the Clippers are a really interesting team, both this free agency, but also how they play out in the next couple of years, because they really do need a full rebuild unless I see them basically being run into that mediocrity area of the NBA, which no one wants to be.
Yeah, certainly a lot more to talk about there. But, I mean, we have to get to this Paul George news that you just broke. 16 minutes still to midnight, and Woj is reporting that George is committed to sign a deal with the Oklahoma City Thunder. We talked about the Thunder with David earlier, but I want to throw this to you, Alex. What do you think that some of the ripple effects might be around the league?
Well, Simon, I love ripple effects. I mean, it's not the stone that goes into the pond; it's the ripples that come off the stone. And that's my favorite analogy. So I appreciate you, taking that into account when you ask these questions. I think the big one is LA. Obviously, they may have to reshift their focus. They talked about looking at DeMarcus Cousins, which may be the way they go, which will give them a pretty traditional roster if they do to go the LeBron and DeMarcus Cousins route, which would be interesting in and of itself. But I think that's where the biggest ripple is LeBron was looking to have someone join him there, and obviously we can't rule out Kawhi if that situation comes into play. But at the moment, it looks like if LeBron decides to join the Lakers, he might be doing it alone. And maybe that's not the worst thing. That was something I wanted to talk about later in the show. I mean, if we get around to it. But maybe if you have the Los Angeles market, you have LeBron James, you have this host of young players, maybe that's enough to lure somebody at the trade deadline this year or in free agency next year.
Two quick updates. Sorry to interrupt. I'll be doing this it gets underway. Number one, from Mark Stein, DeAndre Jordan and the Mavericks have scheduled a 12:01 a.m. meeting to immediately launch into negotiations and are expected to quickly reach terms on a new deal. And Rudy Gay is back with the Spurs on a one-year, $10 million deal. So obviously that's not as important, but I just want to throw it out there.
And one more thing I just wanted to get in there. I teased this. I did my Greeny tease. I think that Paul George signing with Oklahoma City is a huge, huge win for the San Antonio Spurs. The Lakers kind of gambled on George last year when they had an opportunity to go out and get him. They sort of laid back in a cut and they waited and hoped that they would woo him in free agency. And now that has not happened, I believe the Lakers might be a little bit more spurred into action when it comes to the Kawhi Leonard front. Obviously, the draw isn't what they thought it was, or Magic Johnson couldn't get in the room. As David reported to us earlier, if Magic Johnson got him in the room, he wouldn't let him go. But I think that the mystique around the Lakers is a little bit lessened, and it might be enough to spur them into action to put Brandon Ingram on the table, to put Lonzo Ball, to put Kyle Kuzma into this deal just to get something done to bring Kawhi Leonard on board.
Yeah, so, I mean, if that's the case, right, and if Los Angeles is getting a little desperate here or, you know, feeling the pressure of bringing in a star, I mean, do you think still that that's a wise reaction to this? Because, look, it didn't work out with Paul George. We know that. But all of these situations are unique, right? And there's obviously the flip side. Zach Lowe brought this up earlier on his podcast today, talking about the flip side of this where, okay, maybe you make the deal and then you're left with a Carmelo Anthony situation. Is there really a right way to play this?
I mean, I think that you have to take action. I think that what we've learned in the past few years is that the teams that are rewarded are the teams that go out and grab the brass ring. And I think that, you know, when you have an opportunity, if Kawhi Leonard is on the table, if you can put together a package, that waiting is all well and good. But obviously we've seen that it's not necessarily the most conducive environment. And, you know, in the worst case scenario, you strike out and you still have that cap room for next year. But I think that you have to take into consideration that this failure, while it doesn't encompass the rest of the future for the Lakers, that it is something that you have to consider, and just being flexible and being able to move forward and go get an asset is pretty important, I think.
I have a rumor update. This is from Kevin O'Connor, and take this as you do. Take this as you will. But the Suns are interested in Trevor Ariza, Avery Bradley also mentioned as targets. So the Suns do not know what they want apparently in the summer.
Yeah, Phoenix starting with that trade for Mikal Bridges. Interesting. They're loading up on 3-and-D wings, I guess. Maybe their plan is to compete this year. Let's go talk about DeAndre Jordan for a minute, though. Nothing is official, but it seems close to that. I guess none of this is official yet, but DeAndre to Dallas Part 2 seems like there's not going to be as much drama surrounding it this time. For the Mavs, I mean, getting the pick-and-roll finisher to pair with their two young ball handlers, I get that. Do we have any idea how long this deal is going to be, though? And, I mean, DeAndre, 30 years old now, like, this could get ugly for a team that has seemingly a different timeline than DeAndre Jordan lines up with.
I would agree with Eric as far as going for that 2+1, that short-term deal, really kind of gauging his decline potentially where it is. Because I feel this year was more based off effort, a lot of things going on behind the team, as well as just lack of engagement defensively. So I'm not sure how you go about that, but definitely I'd say money over years on that respect. If you're bringing DeAndre, I'm assuming that the Mavericks are thinking they can contend with Doncic, with Dennis Smith Jr., with some other pieces, bringing Dirk back. I'm assuming that's the thinking. But you also don't want to have him on the albatross of a contract where he's a center that strictly relies on athleticism. And when that goes, I mean, who knows what you're left with. So that's the thing. And if I was Dallas, I'd also lock the doors when negotiating with him just until that's all cleared up.
Yeah, that's certainly probably the priority number one there. We're 10 minutes away from the official start of free agency, guys, although, I mean, clearly the reports are just flooding in now. But let's talk about LeBron James again. We're joined by TJ Burns, who is LeBron's #1 fan. That's his official title. TJ, with the news that Paul George is going to Oklahoma City, what do you think this says about LeBron James? Does it say anything about if it's going to change the direction he's leaning?
No, I mean, the rumors of LeBron going to LA have been around for about a year now, and it's been based off of outside basketball circumstances, which have not changed and will not change whether Paul George is there or not. Plus, they have opportunities for Boogie Cousins, and then they have a pretty solid young roster to begin with. And LeBron seems to believe he's playing with house money for the rest of his career. That's what every source close to him says. So as far as his immediate decisions, I'm not so sure Paul George not going will make him not make this decision. Plus, the reports of Dan Gilbert being ambivalent at best about his wishes of LeBron coming back probably don't help any.
TJ, do you have, I mean, so it sounds like you still feel like LA is the spot. Do you have any feeling on if you had to rank right now, like, or give percentages to it? I mean, LA #1, Cleveland, Philly. If it's not LA, what do you think is the possibility here?
I mean, from all indications, LA is probably like 95%. Then second place would be Cleveland with like, 2%, and then the field has 2%, something like that. I really don't have much hope. I don't think Cleveland fans should have much hope. I think they should be getting Kevin Love jerseys.
TJ, let me ask you a question. What is I guess panic meter is not the right question. I mean, you're LeBron James man. You're going to be going wherever LeBron's going. Where do you hope that is, just from your I guess it's not like team fandom, it's just like player fandom. Where do you hope? What's the best situation there?
Do you want him to be happy as much as Brian Windhorst wants him to be happy?
Well, what makes being a LeBron fan unique to being fans of other athletes is exactly what you just said, is that LeBron fans do have a tendency to follow him from team to team, which is something that's been pretty unique to him as a superstar, something he basically invented possibly in the 90s. Jordan fans would have followed him, but we'll never know. But, the one thing LeBron has proven to be a master of is creating narratives, and he can make the narrative work wherever he goes. If he stays in Cleveland, he's a Rust Belt legend for the rest of recorded history. But even if he leaves, that he would probably have that anyway. So why not go to LA, resurrect one of the league's prestige franchises, where among names like Magic, Kareem, and Kobe, he might be the best player to have ever played for that franchise.
Okay. Hold on a second. What? I want to get a question in here for really quick. Yeah. My question is, how do you feel about and then I want to address this whole Lakers thing. That just threw me. Oh my God. How do you feel about a very traditional roster? Say the Lakers sort of re-gauge their interest. They do manage to lock LeBron down, and they sort of change their interest towards a Boogie Cousins. How do you feel about that as a much more traditional makeup of a roster around LeBron, as opposed to sort of what he dealt with in Cleveland?
Well, one of Cleveland's main problems is that they had about 7 players on the roster who were maybe okay at doing one thing. Whereas at the very least, you have guys within better determined roles. And if anything, the way the league is moving, the Lakers moving into a more traditional lineup can almost be a counterbalance and might have some success. But it's too soon to tell without seeing on the court and seeing the progression of all the young guys. It's really hard to say at this point.
TJ, do you think that, if LA can't bring in Kawhi, but they do bring in LeBron, he'll have the pull within that organization right away to say, I want you to move these young pieces for another star, even if it isn't Kawhi, but it might be another player. CJ McCollum was what I negotiated in our mock offseason. There's the market's going to be hot, certainly with a lot of names. Do you think that LeBron will be able to dictate that, similar to what he did with Kevin Love when he went to Cleveland?
I think it will definitely be a more collaborative effort with Magic than any relationship he had in Cleveland, but that might be for the positive. But what I'm interested by, as far as that sort of player and franchise dynamic goes, is how is Luke Walton going to handle all of this? I mean, you are coming in, building this young team in a prestige franchise, and all of a sudden LeBron James comes in, and LeBron has been tough on coaches, even the good ones. So I'm really interested to see how Luke Walton adjusts the way he coaches his team to such a big personality like LeBron. I mean, there's nothing bigger in the league.
So TJ, having seen LeBron go on different teams and over time make those teams in his image, what do you think about the personnel in LA as far as how they fit off of LeBron? Because I was actually thinking the same thing as far as coaching wise. You a player you've basically schooled is now in charge, and that whole dynamic, which will definitely be interesting, if that comes about. But with the Lonzo Ball, with the Brandon Ingram, Julius Randle, wherever he is, barring any moves that LA may make, and restricted free agency, all of that. What do you think about the potential pieces around LeBron, before they start moving anything? And do you think that the Lakers front office will kind of cede that sort of, let's say that just privilege or responsibility for LeBron to kind of handpick his players, bring in those, age shooters, make the team in his own direction? What do you think is going to kind of happen with all of that, if that happens?
Well, first things first, LeBron's going to get J.R. Smith to come in and dribble backwards on the court. It can't be worse than Cleveland. I guess that was that's the nicest way I can put it, even with Lonzo Ball's horrible two-handed shot. If I were the Lakers, I'd avoid giving up Kuzma at all possible. It feels unlikely if they're going to try and get Kawhi, which I'd understand, but he's the kind of player who could really excel around LeBron. With Lonzo, the problem with Lonzo is that he is good at the things that LeBron is excellent at. So I'm not sure what you do with Lonzo while LeBron's on the court. And then Brandon Ingram, once again, there's going to be, of those three guys, you can pretty much count on one of them being gone if the Lakers try to make some sort of move for Kawhi or whatever jiu-jitsu they do to try to get Boogie. But as far as the roster goes, I don't know that it really matters, because LeBron will make whatever work, because he's the queen of the chessboard. He can fill in any blank space. Yeah, I'm standing.
All right, TJ, we're 2 minutes from free agency officially kicking off. I'm all LeBron'd out. Certainly talk about it more as the offseason goes on. Thanks so much for coming on the show. Love the jersey, by the way.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So, guys, 2 minutes left until this thing starts. Any more signings come down since we started talking to TJ?
We have a few. Eric, are you there? Are you? I think you're muted. Okay, we can't hear him. We have a couple of signings that have come down. The joys of live television. We got Joe Harris agreeing to a 2-year, $16 million deal with the Nets. Doug McDermott, 3 years, $22 with Indiana. And that's all I've seen. Anybody else seen anything else?
Just that DeAndre Jordan and the Mavs expect to have a deal ready within the first few minutes of free agency. Also, Russell Westbrook is wearing a Yankees hat at his party, so I'm going to keep you guys updated on what's happening.
Am I still muted? Can you guys hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay, because I have another signing. Ersan Ilyasova, 3 years, $21 million with the Milwaukee Bucks.
Oh.
Now, wait a minute. Because I was muted, I didn't get to do I tweeted out to the Doug McDermott contract, excuse me, what? Because that's my reaction. I don't understand how on earth Doug McDermott got that deal from the Pacers and why the Pacers are giving Doug McDermott that contract. But I'm here to announce them and not analyze them right as they come down, but just want to announce that. Also, okay, wait, another one. Chris Paul will sign a 4-year, $160 million max contract with the Houston Rockets. So he got 4 years instead of 5. Good for the Rockets. That's good for the Rockets. That 5th year probably would be terrible. The 4th year is probably going to be an issue, but I think the next 3 years of that contract can be, pretty good. But that's all I've got so far.
I think one of the interesting things that you have to take away from this immediately is that Jabari's probably gone in Milwaukee. I mean, am I wrong there with that Ilyasova signing?
Has to be, right?
Yeah. Doesn't that kind of spell the end of Jabari there?
Yeah, unless they move major salary elsewhere, they're going to be well into the luxury tax if they sign Jabari to any, substantial contract. So, and plus there isn't a role for him because Giannis is best deployed at the 4. Ilyasova has to be at the 4, or maybe some small ball 5. So that just squeezes out a spot for Parker as it is. So I think it's probably suggests that he's not going to be long for the Bucks. Now, do they do a sign and trade to try to get some sort of asset back, or do they just maybe rescind the qualifying offer and let him become unrestricted? I don't know, but I think this is a really interesting signing. Ilyasova was on the Bucks for the first 7 years or so of his career. And he's kind of circled his way back, and I guess he wanted to reconnect with Bud, and that could be an influence there. Bud probably liked him in Atlanta as a spacey big that kind of is the kind of guy that Bud likes to have on his team. So now Ilyasova can replace Teletovic, who had the unfortunate blood clotting issues, and we'll see how that goes.
He's coming home, from Ian Begley, just dropping by the Church of Hazonia. There's mutual interest between Mario Hazonia and the Knicks. He has multiple suitors, and they're looking to offer short-term contracts to maintain space to 2019. Sacramento, obviously, also has interest in Hazonia.
Yeah, so we'll keep tabs on the summer of Mario here, but we talked about Ilyasova's contract was a sign against Jabari staying in Milwaukee. Are we feeling the same way about McDermott and Thad Young's prospects of re-signing in Indiana?
Well, Thad Young opted into a player option, so he's going to be on the roster regardless. I don't understand the Doug McDermott contract. Please, can someone explain this to me? They brought back Bogdanovich as well, so he's not going to be starting. Glenn Robinson III is better than McDermott and could have been had for much cheaper, I assume. Please, someone explain this to me. I am absolutely dumbfounded right now.
I think it was a subliminal message to Lance Stevenson that, it's time for him to move on. Bringing all these one-dimensional kind of shooting wings. Well, I mean, Doug McDermott, I actually like him as a piece and actually think it's good for Indiana. It's just the contract, really, that's like, why? And as you said, is so much better. So I don't really get it.
I mean, I guess we'll have to see if there's maybe some non-guarantees somewhere in there. Like maybe the first year's guaranteed, second year's only half guaranteed, third year's non-guaranteed. Because, I mean, McDermott, the Mavs just declined his qualifying offer. They didn't even want him back. I mean, McDermott's been around the block. It just doesn't make any sense for a team like the Pacers, who have money that could be used in a smart manner, to give Doug McDermott this deal. But we'll have to wait for the details, of course. But as of right now, I am completely dumbfounded by that.
There is something very Stan Van Gundy-ish about this deal, and I don't mean that in a good way. It seems kind of like one of those first day of free agency overpays that tends to happen every year. Now, in this cap environment, this is considered an overpay. I don't think this would have been a terrible contract for a player like McDermott a couple of years ago. But at the same time, I mean, we've questioned Kevin Pritchard before last summer, for example, on young guys who we had kind of given up on, and he's proven us wrong. So I'll give McDermott a chance to fit in there. It just seems like they probably could have waited out this wing market and gotten a more competent two-way player for a similar price.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. Like, is it really terrible? I mean, it's not. It depends on how the guarantees work out in that contract. It depends on, if that third year is going to be guaranteed at all, if it's a partial guarantee, whatever. They needed spacing, and they needed somebody who could do it, who could give Victor Oladipo some room. And I think they need somebody who can give Miles Turner some room. So it may be proven that this is not the best signing in the world, but I think I'd rather sort of play the field and see where this one goes with Indiana, because that's the thing that they needed. Now, they also need a point guard who can handle the ball and play defense, which they did not draft in Aaron Holiday, but I guess we'll see. So I'm a little bit in the same boat as you, Sam. I'm a little confused, but I'm a little more optimistic that this might sort of work out for Indiana.
Whoa, significant developments here from Mark Stein. DeAndre Jordan and the Mavericks have verbally agreed on a one-year deal approaching the $24.1 million option with the Clippers that he declined yesterday. He's getting the same deal but for Dallas, which is interesting. That's great for the Mavericks, I think. I always question them going after Jordan in the first place because I assumed they were going to give him a 4-year deal, around this kind of salary. But to get a 1-year deal, if things don't work out, Luka Doncic and Dennis Smith Jr. get a great pick and roll partner, rim runner, somewhat of a shot blocker, rim protector, but that's declined rapidly pretty recently. But for 1 year, if it doesn't work on, they can just move on. If it works on, they can sign him for cheaper as he ages. I think it's a good move for the Mavericks. DeAndre Jordan, very questionable move on his part.
Well, it allows him to get back on the market in a summer where there's going to be more money. Why do you say it's questionable there?
I just feel like for him at 30, I think he's 30 or 31. I would have. I mean, if I'm him, I'm looking, and I get entering the market, but there will be also other teams in the market, other big men on the market next summer. What if he has a down year with the Mavericks? Injuries. I know he never gets injured, but you can never assume he's not going to get injured. I just assumed that he was going to be going for like 4 years just to get that money guaranteed for the next 4 years as he ages. I'm just saying, if he has a down year with the Mavericks, or if his decline continues like he had last year with the Clippers, he has to play his way into the next contract. While if you get a contract now, you already have it locked up for the next 4 years.
I don't think these numbers are exact, but I think we're at 102 this year, 108 next year, and then like 116 the year after that. I think you're going to see a lot of guys who want to get back on the market in that next little bump. I mean, maybe that's me being optimistic about it, but that's what I think.
Yeah, and I mean, like I mentioned earlier, DeAndre going to Dallas on the 1 year deal certainly makes sense given their timeline with Doncic and Dennis Smith, not locking into bad money, money that will be bad a couple years down the line as those guys start to enter their primes.
Yeah, and it kind of sounds like there's a narrative here that Jordan just didn't want to play for the Clippers again this year. Maybe some sort of friction with Jerry West. Maybe he just didn't want to be a part of the kind of mini rebuild going on, and so he wanted to move on. The Clippers didn't make it clear that they would trade him to the Mavericks. And so he opted out and is basically going to sign for the same amount of money to get to move to Dallas. Kind of just basically a trade, except he didn't have to get the Clippers' permission.
And if there's any coach I think that can maximize the talents of DeAndre Jordan, it is Rick Carlisle in that system, multiple ball handlers, that type of offense. I think at best it's a 1 year showcase for him. And if he does have a down year, then we have questions. But I think it'll be pretty solid.
I also think he's an integral part to build on the back of that. I also think he's an integral part to Dallas's offense. We know how good Luka Doncic is as a pick and roll ball handler. Dennis Smith has also excelled in that. They needed a screener, and maybe this is the successful version of the Nerlens Noel experiment. But DeAndre Jordan was in like the 89th percentile as a roll man scorer this year. That's the perfect thing for them to add to this young core. Whether it pays off next year and they make a playoff run, whatever, just give them the opportunity for Luka Doncic and Dennis Smith to play with a guy who can screen and roll as well as DeAndre Jordan can, I think is huge for their development.
Just want to announce that Doug McDermott's deal is fully guaranteed, so we can end the speculation on that.
Okay, never mind. I take it back everything I said.
I listened to what you guys said, and I saw some things on Twitter, and I at first I was like, maybe it's not as bad as I think it is. But then I was also thinking about him being a fully guaranteed $22 million when he could barely stick on a team for more than half the season. And maybe it was the wrong team, maybe the situation's better. The Pacers front office has done well recently, but I still have concerns about this signing.
Yeah, I mean, I have much larger concerns now that I thought there was going to be some financial flexibility. I mean, Josh said it really well. Like, it takes them out of a lot of the restricted free agency market. We heard that they were going to make a play for Aaron Gordon. We heard that maybe Jabari was in play. And now that's seriously hampered by this deal.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I just have to consider myself more of a Kevin Pritchard optimist at this point. I mean, what we saw last summer from this team, and a lot of guys who I was down on just really elevated their games there last year. It seems like something's working here with Nate McMillan. I don't know. I'm in on the Doug McDermott signing for the time being. I'll leave it at that.
What's funny is I actually agree with you, Simon, because after last year I was all over Kevin Pritchard, like horrible moves, this and that. I totally ate my words, and so now I'm a little bit more, cautious when it comes to that. I'm gonna wait and see.
Yeah. So, guys, I mean, God, there's this huge flurry of deals that you just rattled off there, Eric. Have we covered them all now? Are we caught up? Or
we didn't mention Joe Harris returning to the Nets, 2 years, $16 million. He was a player that I was interested to see if a smart team would, if the Nets would try and let him go, but also B, if if a smart team would try and scoop him up, is a guy who can obviously hit shots, but he can also drive to the rim. Not a terrible defender, obviously not above average, but capable enough that you can throw him on the floor and not kill your defense. He was a role player that I was looking at for some teams to pick up, but the Nets, he wants to stay in Brooklyn, and the Nets he was unrestricted, so the Nets gave him a nice offer. And $8 million for people who are casual fans probably are like, who the hell is Joe Harris? What a generic name that is, but I think he's worth that deal, especially for the Nets. Nice piece for them in terms of spacing the floor for their guards like D'Angelo Russell and a big man like Jared Allen.
Yeah, Harris I think was one of the better options on the market for teams looking for a shooter. And again, it's just I think on the first day of free agency, sometimes guys will get a little bit more because teams want that like. They have a target in mind, and that's their guy. Now, Harris re-signing in Brooklyn, a little bit different, but he really seems to have blossomed there and grown in his career. So I think for both sides, it makes a lot of sense.
Another signing, Aaron Baines, 2 years, $11 million to return to the Celtics. So didn't take any meetings, and it's a nice deal for both sides, in my opinion.
I think it's a really big day for guys with awesome red beards. That's my hot take on it. I love Baines. I think he's a great player. I think he was really great for the Celtics. He brought a lot of mental toughness. He is not afraid to get dunked on, which I think is a very underrated trait. Like, he's going to contest everything. And I think just that mental toughness, that defense that he's going to bring to the table is going to be critical for a Boston team that is going to be competitive this year, bringing back Kyrie Irving and Gordon Hayward. I think they needed him. And I think it says one more thing, that they're not 100% sold on Robert Williams being an immediate contributor. I've been a little bit hesitant on getting on the Robert Williams hype train. I know a lot of Celtics are on it. I've seen some things as we watched film for him this year to do the draft guide that I did not love. And I think that bringing Baines back says there might be a little bit of caution when it comes to Robert Williams.
Guys, sorry. I just wanted to talk quickly that Aaron Baines shot 11 of 23 on three-pointers in the playoff, which is good for 48%. Listen, I'm all for Aaron Baines shooting threes on a regular basis in the regular season. Just want to put that out there. What a sight that would be. But nice deal for the Celtics. And nice for Baines as well to get some 2 years. And I assume it's going to be fully guaranteed, but we'll find out later.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, 2 years, $11 million. It kind of seems like that's the new 4 years, $68 million. I mean, isn't Aaron Baines basically the Jan Mahimi of this market? Like, I don't know. It's just crazy how much things have changed over the last couple of years. Baines was a guy that I actually think is doing well to get $5.5 million a year again if this is fully guaranteed. I mean, I had him as a minimum target for the Golden State Warriors and a piece I wrote for Hoops Habit. But he jumped on that money quick, and clearly there is mutual interest in him returning.
It sounds like this may not be true. I'm seeing something on Twitter, though, that they may not have used the mid-level exception on Baines, which if that's the case, look for Boston to make maybe one more move. Obviously, that's going to develop a little bit more over the next few hours or whatever. But I think it's interesting if they did do it without using the mid-level exception. I wonder what their exploration is to go after maybe another ball handler or another wing. And I think what happens with that mid-level exception will sort of give us a clue on what they think about Marcus Smart.
Yeah, so because Aaron Baines was signed to a one-year deal with Boston last year, the Celtics had non-burn rights, which means they could bring him back at 120% of his previous salary, which was somewhere in that $5.4 million mold. So you expect that plus a slight raise on year two equals the $11 million, which keeps their full exception to use moving forward as well. So I think that's probably what happened here. And Baines will probably have less of a role this season. Horford's going to play primarily at center because Boston's going to be so flush with wings. But I think what Boston needs Baines for, in addition to sopping up some regular season minutes, is guarding Joel Embiid in the playoffs. They need a guy with that size and that strength. And I think he did really well against Embiid last year. So I think that Boston kind of keeps him in the fold as a secret weapon to deploy in those kinds of situations, similar to what Atlanta used to do all those years ago with, I believe it was Jerron Collins to guard Dwight Howard.
Just want to quickly interject and say Jeremy Grant has agreed to a 3-year, $27 million contract to return to the Thunder. Interesting. I thought some team would offer him something and the Thunder would have to match. That Thunder team is going to be really expensive, really, really expensive. But nice for Grant to get that deal, and nice for the Thunder to get a really nice, underrated piece in Jeremy Grant back for the next 3 years.
All right. So, do we have Jackson Frank on the line?
We do. He is on the line with us. Say hello to Jackson.
All right. Jackson Frank is joining us here. Jackson writes for the Liberty Ballers, B-Ball Breakdown, covers the Philadelphia 76ers, among many other things. Jackson, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, so we've just been going through this flurry of moves. Get your thoughts on any of them, but I do want to talk to you about the Philadelphia 76ers, who we haven't heard from yet. We talked earlier about Paul George seemingly agreeing to a deal to return to OKC, some of the ripple effects that might have on the Lakers and on the San Antonio Spurs. We didn't really hit on the Philadelphia angle here. How do you think, in a broad sense, George returning to OKC affects the Sixers this summer?
Yeah, I think he was more a guy that theoretically fit in really well with the Sixers. Tom West, who also writes for Liberty Ballers, wrote a great piece, and he was almost a glove-like fit, but there wasn't a lot of actual rumors or reports linking those two parties together. So I think while his skill set was super valuable in Philadelphia, I don't think it was much of a surprise. I think it was pretty much a two-team race between the Sixers or between the Lakers and the Thunder for George over the next few years. I don't think it's a huge deal that the Sixers didn't really get any traction with him there. I think they're going to be patient. If they want LeBron, obviously that's kind of the golden goose for them. But I think I would love to see them be patient and not rush into any big signings if it's not LeBron and kind of waste some cap space, because next offseason is going to be awesome again too. You have guys like Jimmy Butler and Klay Thompson that are hitting the market probably. So I mean, George would have obviously put them on a pretty big contender map in terms of competing for a title coming out of the East next year with the Celtics, but I didn't see that signing pop up on my phone or my Twitter and kind of have my heart drop or anything. I wasn't expecting the Sixers to really have a chance there, but I think it's a good move for the Thunder and George and whatnot.
Yeah, Jackson. So given that we haven't heard from Philadelphia, I mean, do you think that their approach is going to be wait and see what happens with LeBron and kind of keep their cap space reserved for after that? Maybe they end up just giving a balloon payment to a guy as they did with Redick last year? Or do you think Philly might get involved here and try to scoop up some of these guys early on?
Yeah, I think the former is probably the likely outcome. I think they want LeBron. They want to be able to get a meeting with LeBron and kind of send their big process contingent to him, Brett Brown, Embiid, Simmons, those guys. And then I think, honestly, now that George's off the market, their priority should be trying to get Redick back. He was a huge part of what they did last year, both on and off the court. It's just a locker room veteran guy. I don't see them making any big splashes tonight trying to sign a guy. I mean, they have some places they could try and shore up some holes, but I think it's one of those things where if you're in the running for LeBron and their cap space is so limited, but if they try to offer a max deal to LeBron, that I don't see them offering any big deal or any deal at all really until they kind of know. I mean, there's going to be guys every year that kind of just hang on the market that can provide some value. Backup center is a pretty important spot they'll need to shore up behind Embiid, but I think there's a lot of guys that they can sign on July 12th or July 13th or something like that. So I think that they're probably just going to wait and try and see if they can throw their hats into the ring and kind of see what they can sell LeBron on in Philadelphia and his potential basketball fit there.
Quickly, we have details on Paul George. It's a 4-year, $137 million max contract with a player option, so I guess it's a 3+1. Longer than a lot of people expected, but just want to throw that out there.
Jackson, I have a question for you. There has been all kinds of talk about what the Sixers might give up if they're pursuing Kawhi Leonard. I think that Markelle Fultz's trade value is crazy low, and maybe that's just on Twitter. Maybe that's not an entirely across the spectrum of the organization. But how much do you think is too much to give up for a pursuit for a guy who's going to put them in rarefied air in Kawhi Leonard, who would fit in with their system really well? What is the line for you?
Yeah, I mean, that's tough. I mean, this whole thing, the process has always been about a long-term view, and sending some of their younger pieces that can contribute down the line would almost not spell the end of the process, but it would almost be kind of the antithesis to the process, going for a win-now guy to potentially only get for 1 year. And let's say they lose to the Celtics in 7 games Eastern Conference Finals, and then they're kind of stuck in that spot they wanted to avoid by kind of selling all their chips 3 or 4 years ago. kind of being stuck, not title contender, but good enough. And so I kind of look at it as, I mean, you look at this year was, I mean, today is awesome. You think that last year when Paul George was signed, or was traded, excuse me, there was pretty much, okay, we'll get him for a year, maybe a little bit of a chance to sell him on OKC, but he's probably going to be out the door to LA, and it's going to be a one year deal. But obviously Kawhi is on a different plane from Paul George. But I think it's whether or not do the Sixers think they can sell Kawhi Leonard on this basketball fit? How is his interest in LA overstated? Is Philly a big enough market? It's a bigger market than San Antonio. Is it a big enough market to sell him there? A deal that's been thrown around a lot is the Dario Saric, Robert Covington, and the 2021 Miami Heat first round pick. Even that, if you can't get Kawhi to commit, feels like a pretty big deal. Feels like a little bit of an overspend. Because if you think Kawhi leaves, that leaves you without one of the best perimeter defenders in the league, a high volume efficient 3-point shooter, and then a guy in Dario Saric who added some playmaking and a lot of good shooting beyond the arc last season. And if you don't have those pieces plus that kind of coveted Miami asset, you're left with potentially a superstar in Fultz, and then two future superstars / current superstars in Simmons, and a lot of guys that you're not really sure would they contribute to a title team. So I would look at something around the lines of Covington and that first round pick from Miami, and I would be really hesitant to give up anything revolving around Fultz or Sarge, because I think those guys are in the long-term plans, and I especially think Fultz is a guy they're still really, really high on internally. A lot of comments have suggested that. So my offer would kind of be something around the lines of Covington and the Miami first-round pick. Gives them a win now guy, but also gives them an asset down the line once they do kind of have to rebuild.
Jackson, I have one more question for you. The Sixers walked away with one of my favorite guys in the draft. I made no secret that I was a huge, huge Zaire Smith fan. How do you feel like he fits in? Not a great shooter, not a tested shooter at least. How do you feel like he fits in next season with this roster?
Yeah, obviously your team at 94 Feet did a ton of awesome draft work and whatnot, and I kind of dove into that a little bit towards the end of the season, not as much as a lot of guys, but I watched a few games throughout the season of Zaire Smith and a few more games post NBA season, post college season, and he just was a guy that he's awesome. He's probably one of the top athletic guys in the league nowadays. Was the most athletic guy in the draft. Awesome defender, incredible on-ball defender, but he wasn't a guy that I was super high on anywhere in the kind of the 10 to 14 range that he was being linked to a lot. I think he's going to provide a lot of great defense. The wing defense was a big glaring hole behind Robert Covington in that second round series against the Celtics, but I just don't know how much offensive value he's going to be able to add, at least on day one. And there's a lot of room he has to grow. He's not a ball handler. He's not really a facilitator. He's got some decent slashing instincts, but I don't know how much value he's going to add from an offensive perspective on day one. And you can't really play him with their two cornerstone pieces and even three cornerstone pieces if Fultz doesn't have a jump shot with Simmons not shooting and MD being kind of a shaky 3-point guy. So I worry about his fit right now, but long term, Brett Brown loves him. I think he's got a ton of upside, and so I think the 3-point shot is going to be the key for him. He's going to be an impact defender. He's going to be probably a guy who makes an all-defensive team or two. He's just that good and smart and athletic on the ball. So I worry about his fit right now, and I'm not a huge fan of him. But that being said, I didn't hate the trade. I think he's gonna add some long-term and some short-term value. I kind of think maybe Shake Milton might add a little more immediate value with his ability to shoot the ball, but I still think he's an asset that is super important, super coveted, and could definitely be even a trade chip if they're looking that way.
All right, I got to jump in here before Alex defends Zaire Smith for the rest of the night. Jackson, really appreciate you coming on the show. Jackson does great draft work over the last several weeks. He's been putting out awesome stuff on Twitter with videos and breakdowns. And why don't you tell people where they can read some of your work coming up here if you have anything coming out soon?
Yeah, so it's kind of that weird period where I'm still enamored with a lot of draft prospects, and the rest of the league is still doing free agency stuff and getting ready for summer league. So I'll I don't have anything on the docket right now. I'll probably put out a little bit of a kind of film study thing that I've been doing on Twitter, but I'll be posting it through Liberty Ballers 2 in the next few days. So just Liberty Ballers and SB Nation site, and then B-ball breakdown. Don't have anything in the works right now, but I'm always on Twitter posting game threads and giving my takes on certain things. And that my Twitter is @JackFrank_JJF. So I love talking hoops with anyone and everyone. So if you want to debate or just talk in general, shoot me a follow or come into my mentions and light me up or something like that. But yeah, I'll be talking and writing over the next few weeks and months and whatnot. And I appreciate all of you guys having me on. I'm going to continue to tune into the show tonight.
All right, Jackson, great talking ball with you tonight. Thanks for coming on late. So we have Brian Toporek joining us in a few minutes here. Guys, has anything else come down since we had Jackson?
Nothing significant. I mean, I guess if you want to talk about the ramifications of Paul George signing a 4-year deal or 3+1 instead of what many people thought would be a 1+1 or a 2+1, that could be. Looks like we've got Brian joining us right now, right on time.
All right, perfect. We had our first little lull for like the last hour. Brian Toporek, Bleacher Report editor, contributor at B-Ball Breakdown, Fansided, and Give Me Sport. Brian, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, so we were just talking about, there's a huge flurry of moves. We've pretty much hit on all of them. We're currently caught up. As we have you on here, we'll certainly announce anything else that comes down. But where I want to start, I mean, I'll just put you on the spot right here. What we've been debating probably the most feverishly was the Doug McDermott signing. Some of us here, myself included, are optimistic about it. I'll say that. I'm not going to say 100% a big fan of it. Others feel like it's an overpay. I think both might be true. How do you feel about Indy giving McDermott a fully guaranteed 3-year, $22 million deal?
The amount of years bothers me more than the salary itself. And I think that's going to be true with a lot of the contracts that get handed out this year. Indy was one of the few teams with cap space. So I kind of expected them to go after shorter term guys. Will Barton's obviously back with Denver, but maybe a Tyreek Evans. I mean, they were rumored to have interest in Aaron Gordon. I'm guessing the Thaddeus Young accepting his player option changed the calculus there. But now it just, you look down the line and that's going to restrict them moving forward. Miles Turner is going to get a big new deal next summer. So I don't know. I mean, I think McDermott could do well in that system, but I just don't understand. He's not the type of player you need to give this type of a deal to midnight July 1st. And so I think that's probably what confuses me the most. But that said, I crapped all over Indiana last summer for all, I thought they were basically their ceiling was a 10 seed and they proved me wrong. So I don't want to rip on it too hard because maybe they know something we don't.
Yeah, that's kind of been my mentality with it. Who knows if Pritchard got lucky last summer or if it was a brilliant move, but we'll see how his track record looks after this summer. Let's talk about Paul George, though, getting the 4-year deal instead of the 2+1, as we talked about earlier, being maybe a reasonable option. I mean, if you're Oklahoma City, this has to be a huge win to lock in George for the remainder of his prime. And he's probably still young enough that deal's never going to look terrible. Why do you think George at this point was ready to commit to that long of a term, especially with him potentially being able to get more money if it did a shorter term deal?
Yeah, I mean, I'm surprised by it. Like you guys, it seems like I thought he was going to do the 2+1 just to maximize the time he could hit that 35% right away. Maybe he's seen kind of the complications that come with these shorter deals, especially he's looking at LeBron in Cleveland and he's hearing the Cavs say, it's tough to build a team around a guy when you just don't know if he's going to be there a year or two from now. So maybe he figures, I'm going to lock myself in for 3 years. Russ is here for 4 years. Now the Thunder front office, no, we've got these 2 guys locked in. We can build around those guys. I mean, it sounds like he's just actually really genuinely likes Russell Westbrook too. And maybe he just, obviously the Lakers appeal is there. It sounds like LeBron James is going to go there as well. So, there are a lot of salty Lakers fans right now saying he like doesn't want to win a championship because he's not joining the Lakers, which I don't think that's the case. I mean, you know, if Roberson hadn't gotten hurt this year, that Thunder team would have been much better than they finished the season. I think you can make a pretty convincing case that they're at least a second round team. I don't think necessarily that adding Paul George to the Lakers, I still don't think that team's getting past the Rockets or the Warriors anyway. So I think really the ceiling for both teams is probably the second round. And if he's happy in OKC, I'm not going to begrudge him for that. So it's a huge win for OKC getting that third year guaranteed. I also think it's a big win for the Spurs. You know, now you're looking at Kawhi Leonard trades, and now the Spurs can come back and say, like, look, a year ago, everyone thought Paul George was going to sign with the Lakers in 2018. He didn't even give a meeting to the Lakers. If you trade for Kawhi, your culture is good, your team is good, you can convince him to re-sign. You know, you have to pony up a little bit more for him.
All right, so Brian, you were talking about how the Thunder had a huge win in bringing back Paul George, but as you're looking at some of the signings that are rolling in, what do you think is probably the most questionable or the biggest kind of loss by a team signing a guy?
Sure. I mean, the Ilyasova deal, I don't hate it because I think Ersan Ilyasova is a decent player. It's just Bobby Marks of ESPN pointed this out. It hard caps them now at about 129.8 million, I think he said. So they've got about 110 million in guaranteed salary on the books already. Jabari Parker is also still a restricted free agent. So now this possibly sets up a scenario where, you know, a team gives him Parker like a gigantic offer sheet, say 20 million, and they will literally not be able to match it because they can't exceed that hard cap now. So they'll have a week before they run into that problem. He can't sign an offer sheet until July 6th, though the earliest they hit that is July 8th. So, you know, if we see in the coming days that Parker is negotiating a big offer sheet, they'll have some time to dump salary. But it makes me wonder, like, you know, Ersan in theory can play, he could be a very poor man's version of what Parker brings to the table. So I kind of wonder if they are mentally preparing themselves to lose Jabari this summer.
I think that's a really interesting point on the hard cap because that's what happened with Detroit last year. They seemed to slightly overspend on Langston Galloway, and then they were hard capped and unable to give Kentavious Caldwell-Pope the contract that he was looking for. And that could be really interesting and kind of questionable if that happens in Milwaukee again as well.
Yeah, I know. You would think they would learn from Detroit's mistake last season because it's the exact same scenario. It was like midnight on July 1st, he gets that deal, and then, you know, midway through the season, Langston Galloway was out of the rotation. It's just like, what? Again, it's like a McDermott too. I just can't, you know, we don't know. We're not privy to these conversations that are going on behind the scenes, and clearly there were a lot prior to July 1st based on how many Woj bombs are coming out even before midnight. So we don't know what Ilyasova's market was heading into this year, but it just strikes me as like, why are you doing this on midnight on July 1st? He feels like the type of player who should be available for that like mini mid-level on July 8th or July 15th or whatever. Like, let this first wave pass and then see, you know, then you could start like discount shopping. But if you know, if the Bucks saw something they really liked, all the power to them.
Yeah, Brian, that really was kind of my feeling with the McDermott signing too. If I did have one criticism of it, it's like, you think you could wait out the wing market and get probably a better two-way player for a similar price. So one more question for you. I mean, outside of like big names that signed tonight, Paul George, Chris Paul, obviously nothing official yet, but do you think any team has gotten good value? What do you think the best value contract that we've seen so far is?
Yeah, I mean, I'm frankly shocked that DeAndre Jordan's only getting a one-year deal from Dallas, reportedly. I kind of figured he was going to get, my prediction was 3 years, $63 million, which would have been like starting at 20 and then going up $1 million every year. So I think it's a pretty good low-risk deal for them. There are concerns about Jordan. He's going to turn 30 soon. It seems like his athleticism may be starting to decline and his game is predicated on that. So locking him into a long-term deal would not be great. But I think he's going to have value, especially on that Mavericks team that, you know, they're not going to win a title next year, but like they don't want to tank in Dirk's what could be Dirk's final season. Like they want to be competitive. I think he'll be a really good rim rolling target for Luka Doncic and Dennis Smith Jr. So I just think it's like on a 1-year deal, there's almost no risk involved. Like the worst case scenario is he busts out and then you just get that cap space back next year. So I think that's really good. Aaron Baines, 2 years, $11 million for Boston. Not only just getting him back, he was a very valuable role player for them last year. I'm a Philly guy, so I am still scarred by him hitting like every corner three he took in that second round series. But they used their non-bird rights on him. So that means they actually still have their taxpayer mid-level exception, which I think is going to be, we'll see who they use it on, but just having that in their back pocket, I think is really valuable. I mean, Kevin Durant, if you could count that as a steal, just, getting him for $5 million less than his max, it behooves him as well, because now next summer he can get the full 5-year max from Golden State. But as a bunch of smart people on Twitter have already pointed out, him taking $5 million less basically means they can make that up and use the taxpayer mid-level. And it basically balances out that way. So it probably means the Warriors are getting even richer this summer, unfortunately. So those stand out as the big steals so far, but I haven't tracked anything in the last couple minutes, so I don't know if any other deals have broken since then.
Yeah, I mean, things seem to have slowed down after a big flurry that did start before midnight. Brian, thanks so much for coming on the show and providing your insight. We kind of went all over the place with you. You also seem to have work all over the place. I listed your myriad of outlets that you write for. Do you have anything coming up that you want to plug or anything you want to put out there?
I'm going to have a piece up tomorrow at B-Ball Breakdown, as long as Kristaps Porzingis does not sign an extension, which it does not seem like he will be. It's a piece about why the Knicks would actually be smart to wait to extend him until next year. And I think Monday, probably for Gimme Sport, I'll have something about the whole Kawhi situation and whether Boston in particular should be going after him even harder, especially if LeBron goes to the Lakers.
All right. Yeah, definitely look for those coming up. Brian does great work. Brian, thanks for taking the time tonight to join us.
For sure. Thanks for having me on, guys.
All right. So 12:38 now. Guys, does anything else come down? It seems to have slowed down. I'm not seeing anything. Any updates on any signings?
I don't think so. I think it's a little bit of a calm here. We had, a flurry of deals agreed to, right at 12:01. Apparently, guys were ready to just make these big decisions, on their first conversations with teams. We're sure no conversations happened ahead of time. But it looks like there was just a flurry of deals that were kind of already agreed to, and that maybe the rest of the conversations will be taking place, later in the day tomorrow once the sun comes up.
Brian did bring something up interesting that I want to ask you, Josh, and can throw this to the group too. Brought up the Golden State Warriors, who we haven't really talked about outside of my slight mention about maybe I was hoping they could get Aaron Baines. Wasn't to be, but Golden State really is in a unique position this summer as one of the highest payroll teams in the league, totally capped out, going to be deep in the luxury tax for sure. And yet, given how little cap space there is around the NBA, they still kind of hold a powerful position this summer, because when cap space is limited everywhere, the better teams that will make you look better because of who you're playing next to and potentially give you a ring suddenly regain an advantage. I mean, what do you think Golden State can do on this market?
I think what Golden State needs to do is be patient, because there are players who want to, get a certain amount of money in free agency, and that money's not going to be there. And so if they give it a few days, let LeBron make his decision, let some pieces settle around that, there's going to be guys out there. I think there'll actually potentially be some really good, wing players, maybe more two-guard players, a guy like Avery Bradley or Contavious Caldwell-Pope, who may decide that they want to, do a 1-year deal and get back on a larger market next summer. And so those guys could come in for the taxpayer mid-level, make a little over $5 million, which would be more than twice what they can make as a veteran minimum. But they could jump in, have a defined role, kind of be the Nick Young on this Warriors team, and have like, I don't know, 70, 80, 90% chance of winning a ring. So that's not a bad way to spend a year. So I think that Golden State has every reason to expect that someone's going to fall to them, someone who, was expecting to be making 12 to 14 million a year, and instead are looking at offers of 6 million. And if they're going to take 6, I may as well just take 5.3 and sign with the Warriors. So I really do think Golden State's going to get someone. DeAndre Jordan, that was just a pipe dream. I don't think that was ever realistic. But Avery Bradley, I think that could absolutely happen. And I think there's some other players who could end up, still available, who could fit nicely there as well.
I was going to say on the big man front, a fit I like to play almost part-time with Bell, if Bell is truly the big man of the future for the Warriors, would be a Kylo Quinn type. A solid mid-range jumper, a pretty good passer, high-risk passer, but with the spacing afforded by Golden State, you can have that. And I think that would be a nice piece, maybe alongside retaining probably JaVale McGee or just having a JaVale McGee type of player, and that's more on the bigs front. But yeah, at this point, as you said, Josh, they kind of have the advantage and the luxury of waiting and having people come to them,
Corbin, I really like what you bring up with O'Quinn. I wrote about this the other day in my Warriors free agency preview for Hoops Habit. O'Quinn has been linked to the Warriors, for several months now, and seems like a guy they could probably get for the mid-level. He just fits their system as a big man so perfectly, right? The mid-range jumper, the high post passing, the ability to, move in space a little bit, protect the rim. He just does what they need guys to do. And like you said, maybe a JaVale McGee type to supplement that would work out, but he would really, maybe even more so than Andrew Bogut, be like the quintessential Warriors big. So I think he's going to be a top target for them.
We have one of the most interesting, unexpected signings just announced. The Phoenix Suns have signed Trevor Ariza to a 1-year, $15 million deal. So many things to unravel here. I don't know where to begin, honestly. Huge blow for the Rockets, number one. Number two, very interested for this from the Suns' perspective. Obviously, it's a 1-year deal, so there's no long-term commitment. But in terms of playing him, Ariza is not going to want to be a guy who's playing 15 minutes a night. He's going to want that 30 minutes a night role. What does that do for their young wings in Phoenix is another question for me. Ariza not wanting to contend. All of his comments were he wants to go somewhere where he can contend. That's why the Warriors situation was interesting for him. If you couldn't get big money, that's why returning to the Rockets was obviously interesting. But that this is not contending. So many. I'm just throwing for a loop here. What a crazy signing.
Eric, you definitely know more about Houston's financial situation than I do. Is there any reason that they might be like saving this money for another move they have up their sleeves, or are they so far over the cap that it just doesn't matter?
No, it wouldn't have mattered. With Chris Paul's max deal, and we don't know what Capella's getting yet. So maybe with very few, if any, suitors left for Capella, they can maybe negotiate smaller deal for Capella. Maybe that saves them money, but projected with Capella and Paul getting anywhere close to max deals for both of them puts them way over the tax, and they were just going to re-sign Ariza and foot a huge luxury tax bill. That was the plan. I guess I'm not sure what the negotiations were with the Rockets, if there were any before he signs this deal, but we'll find out if they offered him something cheap, maybe, if they didn't want to go too long in terms of years. This is a crazy change of events for Ariza, for the Suns, for the Rockets, who would now have to replace Trevor Ariza, who's been a starter since he joined that team in 2014-15. The 3-and-D component of his game comes and goes, but still a solid defender and a solid three-point shooter. 33 years old, he's going to be declining pretty quickly, but the Suns only get him on a 1-year deal, so very, very fascinating.
Eric, do you think – oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Corbin.
I was going to say, do you think it's imperative now that the Rockets do re-sign Bamute?
Yeah, well, they have to go after him hard. They have to, and they don't have much to offer him except an exception. I think the mid-level with $5.5 million. Again, I'm not a salary cap guy, but somewhere around that range is what the most they could offer him realistically. They don't have bird rights on him because they signed him to a 1-year minimum deal last year. It'll be interesting because I think that there could be a lot of teams that'll be going after Mbamute, not in this kind of deal like Ariza, but a great veteran presence in the locker room. He's only 31, I believe, so he can still play roles as a mostly defensive, but he adds somewhat of a three-point shot there. I'll be interested to see if there are other rebuilding teams that want him for the locker room, if there are other contending teams that want to offer him this. But the Rockets have to go after Mbamute hard. They have to go after Gerald Green or some other wing because replacing Trevor Ariza is going to be huge, obviously. He's a role player, but He played over 32 minutes a game, I think, each of the past 4 seasons. Even just slotting Mbamute into a starting role at small forward is a loss there. It just is. So much to unravel here for the Sun side, and most importantly, probably for the Rocket side, who are actually a contending team.
Yeah, just coming down, Ed Davis has agreed to a 1-year, $4.4 million deal with the Brooklyn Nets. Davis, another guy kind of like Aaron Baines, who I think had he waited around might have been fighting for a minimum contract somewhere in this market that's saturated with big men. So I think, good for him to go out and get a little bit more than that. Interesting fit in Brooklyn. Davis, definitely more established defensive presence than Jared Allen, but kind of similar players, might be a good mentor there. Anyone have any thoughts on Davis to the Nets?
I agree with you. Great defensive player. Probably teach some tricks to Jared Allen as far as, just where to be positioning. Not that he didn't have a bad season or anything, but just having that veteran leadership. But wow, just kind of out there, in my opinion. I didn't think that was a pressing need for Brooklyn, and I guess they thought it was. So here we are.
Yeah. So Brooklyn brought Joe Harris back. They brought in Ed Davis now. Doesn't seem like they have any grand plans to use any cap space this summer. But filling out their roster with some nice, I don't know if you call them bargain deals, but solid value to be sure. So we're about 15 minutes away from 1 a.m. on the East Coast, where we're going to wrap up here. It's been a much more active first 45 minutes than I think any of us expected here.
I have a thought, actually, just something that I'm kind of putting pieces together. So I think Brooklyn is, adding some pieces. They want to, win some games. They want to start kind of building towards something, but they're not adding any long-term money of contracts they want to keep on the books. I think what might be an option for them in helping out a Phoenix, working with a Phoenix team that seems to want to make a playoff push, is a trade where they send a guy like Jeremy Lin to Phoenix, maybe for Jared Dudley and a pick of some kind. And so, or, one of their young players, Dragon Bender, Marquise Chris, one of these guys, because that way Brooklyn gets an asset. They move Lin because I think they're set at point guard right now. And that gives Phoenix a point guard who presumably can help more than the guys they have on the roster right now. Brandon Knight's not going to help Phoenix if they're really trying to make a playoff push. So I think something like that could be interesting because Brooklyn now has a lot of players, a lot of, good values. And so they may be looking to move a couple of them because they're very tradable contracts to teams that need to get some guys to help, but maybe couldn't sign them in other ways.
I also have a question for all of you guys. We just talked about Ariza and trying to process that whole signing for Phoenix. But with that move, it does cap Phoenix out. So the only point guards I see on their roster is Brandon Knight and Elie Kobo. Is there a plan for them to move anyone? Is that who they're rolling with next season? Especially if you get Ariza and you're hoping to win now. That's the signing, as Eric just said. It just gets more confusing the more I think about it.
Yeah, so we can certainly get to that in a minute. We have Joshua Howe joining us of Raptors Republic and B-Ball Breakdown. Josh, thanks for joining us here at almost 1 a.m. on a weekend night.
Man, thanks for having me, guys. Happy Canada Day.
Yeah, so we haven't had any news on the Raptors front, but something we were discussing earlier on the show was the restricted free agency of Fred VanVleet, and we talked about Phoenix as a potential destination. Then we just got into this crazy headline of Phoenix signing Trevor Ariza to a $15 million deal. Still could be an option there. But with VanVleet's free agency, we talked a lot about the restricted market and how unpredictable it is for a lot of these guys that have had injury problems, the Exums, the Jabari Parkers, and then, some of the guys who have been more up and down that expect a bigger payday but may or may not get it. VanVleet seems to be one of the more stable restricted options here. What do you think his market is looking like, especially based on some of the deals we've seen so far tonight?
His market, I think it's really interesting. It'll be, he's definitely a team that, he's definitely a player that other teams should be looking at because of the year he had. He was really fantastic this year. Flew under the radar for some people, but, he was in the 6th man of the year conversation. It's tough for some teams I think, to look at it in terms of how much they want to offer him, because the Raptors are only going to not match if he gets some kind of crazy backloaded deal, which, as a Raptors fan, you're terrified some team like Phoenix is going to offer him that. But because of his, he's under the Gilbert Arenas provision, this combination of early bird rights and restricted free agency, he can only be offered the MLE for the first 2 years. So the Raptors can, match that because of the early bird rights, no matter what happens. So I think that they're going to match almost anything, but there's a chance that some team goes crazy and decides they really want to commit to Van Vliet, and they backload the deal and offer him quite a bit of money. So I think it looks pretty good for the Raptors, especially with Phoenix and their latest moves. But you never know. There's always some team that's willing to do that. So guess we'll see.
What do you think about the idea that Toronto may try to unload some money this summer? Do you think that's a realistic possibility, or is there just not the space out there?
Yeah, I think if they'd like to attempt to duck the tax if they can. Obviously, they didn't bother extending Luke Bebe his qualifying offer, because to bring him back, it would have been around like $4 million, which is a lot for a third-string center. If they bring back Van Vliet, they will be, they're already projected to be over the tax a little bit, so that'll just make things a little tougher. I think, anything could happen with Lowry and DeRozan, so that's kind of up in the air. As for Ibaka, I think that contract's kind of immovable. I think Valanciunas is likely to stick around because he's a Nick Nurse type guy, and Nurse has talked a lot about how he wants to use Valanciunas more and more. It's not like he's untouchable or anything, but I just see him being around if the team wants to keep being competitive, which they seem to want to be going forward. I think Norman Powell's the guy, if you're looking at a player that the Raptors are going to try and get off of his contract. So his extension just kicked in. He's up to, his contract's now up to $9 million around there. So he'll be easier to salary match and stuff like that now. So I think if you're looking around at the Raptors roster, that Powell's got to be the guy that the Raptors try and move off of.
Josh, one more question for you. You brought up Nick Nurse. In Toronto, first of all, how much pull do the coaches have, or did Casey have within the front office there? It seemed like he's pretty lockstep with Masai, and do you think Nurse is going to have that same kind of power over his roster? And then if so, do you think that he wants to take the talent on the team in a different direction, or is his approach going to be more, we need to change up the scheme, we need to maybe change up the mentality in some of our guys? How do you think he's going to go about trying to change Toronto's culture or roster, or neither?
Yeah, so I think in terms of like culture and stuff like that, I think that's what Dwayne Casey was great for. He was one of the building blocks of what you see for the Raptors now. I think that's kind of how they got to the point of what their culture is. How they became a 59-win team. Dwayne Casey is the best coach the Raptors have ever had. He's a great macro guy. He's really good at getting guys to buy in. Very amenable guy, always classy. He's a player's coach kind of player, kind of coach, and he's just he's really good at almost everything except for some of the X's and O's stuff, and then that gets magnified, and that's the kind of stuff that people blow up about and say he's not up to snuff there. And you hear stories about like Masai Ujiri bursting into locker rooms of playoff games at halftime and getting mad at him about certain things and whatever. So I think Nick Nurse is the guy that they've decided, look, his offensive system is what the Raptors ran this year, and it held up really well, held up in the playoffs. That's what mattered. He's their guy. He's the guy who now has to, with the macro set, the Raptors obviously feel like the culture and everything is already instilled, so they don't have to worry about that now. Now what they need to worry about is the micro stuff, about maybe some lineup stuff that could have been done better, maybe some more tweaks to the offense that could have made it even better, adjusting the defense, because the defense was an issue in the playoffs. That kind of thing. That's the kind of stuff that Nurse is going to be looked at, especially if the Raptors do run it back and have the same exact roster. It's going to be that micro stuff that everyone will be looking at the Raptors, and and Nick Nurse and saying, okay, you have the exact same team pretty much. What can you do different than Casey? Because the Raptors had a great year. They were a 59-win team and atop the East. So it'll be interesting to see what he does. But I definitely think he'll have some different takes than Dwayne Casey.
All right, Josh, thanks for taking the time to join us tonight. There's been a lot of deals, nothing on the Toronto front so far, but they're going to be an interesting team moving forward with Fred VanVleet and some of those other questions. Before we let you go, why don't you plug any work you have coming up or that you put out recently, or just tell people where they can find your work when it does come out?
Yeah, for sure. I want to thank you guys for having me on, especially when I'm half delirious at nearly 1 a.m., but appreciate it. You guys are doing a great show. Yeah, you can find me at @Halvolution on Twitter. You can find my work on Raptors Republic and B-Ball Breakdown occasionally. And nothing for sure in the pipe yet, but if Raptors make any deals, you can be sure that I'll have something coming up.
All right. Thanks, Josh. That was Joshua Howe, Raptors Republic, B-Ball Breakdown. We talked about Fred VanVleet earlier on the show, and again, how hard it would be for teams to get off of some of the salary, which Toronto certainly wants to do. We're getting ready to about wrap up here. It's nearing 1 a.m., 12:56 on the East Coast. Let's go. Eric, do we have any more updates? Is the action done for the night?
Omri Caspi has signed a 1-year deal with the Grizzlies. I assume it's going to be for a minimum, but that has been announced. Derrick Rose returning to the Timberwolves for 1 year, 2.1. So Tyus Jones continues to suffer there. Maybe a team will try and get Tyus Jones. That's the only thing I've seen in the past 10 or so minutes, I believe.
I can't decide which of those signings I hate more. I think that Caspi is like I really like Omri Caspi's game. I don't know what he's doing in Memphis. He seems like a guy that teams that are trying to find 3-and-D players might want to give a chance. I don't know. And then Derrick Rose to Minnesota. I mean, we all knew it was coming, but
interesting development in the Ilyasova contract. Did you guys talk about that?
No, sorry, I forgot to report that. Yeah,
the third year of the Ilyasova deal in Milwaukee is non-guaranteed. So that is a little bit that's interesting. I'm not sure what it puts out on the line for Milwaukee in the 2021 season, but it is something of note.
Yeah, so makes it a little bit less of a tough pill to swallow there for Milwaukee. I don't know, guys. I think we might wrap it up here. It seems like things have died down. I'd be willing to, give Corbin a chance to speak his piece on LeBron. We haven't heard that yet tonight. Before we get out of here.
It's funny. I was about to ask you and ask everyone. It seems so quiet on LeBron's front. There was so much talk earlier. He's in LA. I was getting excited looking for my Lakers jersey. That happens to be a Nick Young one, but whatever. But now we haven't heard anything, and I mean, I'm not worried, given the options and all of that, but I'm just wondering what's possibly taking so long. I heard that, or words out that the Clippers are really intensifying their talks to get Kawhi from the Spurs, which is interesting. But yeah, that's the quietest news. I've heard about Omri Caspi before I heard about LeBron James since midnight, and I did not expect that to happen. I almost forgot he was in the NBA.
LeBron's using his stranglehold over the league. He wanted to make us all wait to see what was going to happen, and no, guys are just signing contracts. I don't know. That's the closest thing I can give to a hot take right now. We're going to wrap up here. We'll consider that Corbin's last word. Corbin, thanks for being with us for 2 hours tonight. Josh Cornelison, always great with the insight. Do you have any closing statements?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of low-key losers to highlight from tonight. Jabari Parker, I think, can't get a big contract in Milwaukee now because they're hard cap. And Indiana, one of the teams that could have offered money, they signed Doug McDermott. Phoenix, another option. They signed Trevor Ariza. There's just not a lot. Brooklyn made a couple of moves, so just not a lot of options out there for him. And I also think we need to all shed a tear for Tyus Jones, who is one of I think the best young backup point guards in the league, and somehow is getting blocked by the corpse of Derrick Rose. So a couple of losers from tonight.
That's some Duke homerism from you. Thank you, Josh.
Alex, anything else to add?
No, I thank everybody for watching. I really appreciate doing this. I feel like I've been on TV all day today, so I can't wait to kick my
Don't feel like it. You have been.
Yeah, I have been on TV. You and I have been on air for like 14 straight hours now. But I think there's a lot of interesting stuff still to come. I think that Jabari Parker. I've been keeping my fingers crossed for a Utah contract, so I would love to see him join that team. But I'll be interested to see how this LeBron thing plays out, and I'm really excited for this. Is our 1 year anniversary at the 94 Feet Report. We started last year today, and I think it's been a pretty great year, and I can't wait for year 2.
And that's a perfect way to send it to Eric Spiropoulos, our editor-in-chief. Eric, close us out tonight.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to say something very nice and sentimental. Before I get to that, though, I must report that Marco Bellinelli has agreed to a 2-year, $12 million deal with the Spurs, so he's returning to San Antonio. But that's pretty irrelevant. Yeah, I want to thank everyone whoever is listening or watching this that has read an article or listened to a podcast on our site or watched some of our episodes of the Swingmen or checked out the draft guide. We've just had such a wide variety of content during our first year, and it's crazy to think that a year ago, 366 days from today, we weren't even really a site that's fully launched, and now we're here putting on live draft shows, have a YouTube channel, various podcasts, and we're going to do bigger and better things this summer. Obviously, first up is free agency coverage, so check out 94feetreport.com for all of that. We have a free agency tab there. That's where we'll have all of our analysis articles, and things are coming to the 94 Feet Report. Can't reveal them yet, but big things are coming. So check it out and follow us on Twitter at the 94 Feet Report. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, and you can follow Eric at Secondhand Woj. So be sure to do that. And
Founding father.
much more to come.
And before we call this thing a night, big shout out to our producer Andrew Johnson. He's been behind the scenes for a while now.
Yes.
He's been sitting in the dark doing his thing. And we appreciate him. He has also worked this 14-hour day with Simon and I. So big shout out to Andrew. We couldn't be doing the things that we're doing without his expertise, both on the streaming and on the graphics side. So thanks, Andrew. Appreciate that. All right, well, I guess that's it. I guess I got caught with the wrap-up because I said the last thing. We will see you soon, and who knows what we're going to be doing. Just stay tuned to the 94 Feet Report, both on Twitter, on YouTube, wherever you follow us, and make sure you're reading the site, and we'll see you soon, all right?
Gerald Green's coming back to the Rockets on a 1-year veteran minimum. Okay, bye, good night.
You're watching The Swingmen, presented by the 94 Feet